You may not have seen The Seventh Seal. You may not have even heard of The Seventh Seal. But this is a movie that has made such an impact on film that you have almost certainly seen its famous imagery. The character of Death with a pale white face and a strange foreign accent in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, straight out of Ingmar Bergman's 1958 film. With each shot framed like a painting, this movie changed the way that films were made. Every actor gives his or her best to a script that reads like a play, because it was one. For a 21st century audience, this one has some headwinds working against it. Black and white, Swedish language, and most importantly, 65 years of imitation. But people call it a classic. So we asked the Lamb to open the seal on a bottle of akvavit and help us see what all the fuss is about. Join us now for episode 88 of Toasting the Classics, The Seventh Seal. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we talk about it while we drink something inspired by the classic. I've got guest host this week.
My name is Chris Gragg.
I am Joe the Congested.
Joe the Congested of Stockholm. Welcome to the pod, guys. You've both been on the show before, so I know you need no introductions. What are we doing this week?
Today we have opened the Seventh Seal.
Oh, boy. Well, then things are going to have to be quiet for about half an hour. Very strange Bible verse.
Except for the angelic chorus.
Oh, I thought it just said that there was silence in the heavens for something like a half an hour. It's really vague.
I was referring to the actual opening of the movie, which
yes, okay, yeah, that's different.
Right? Yes, but both are true. Although I do like your translation of that verse better. It was silence in the heavens for something like half an hour.
Yeah, that's the way it sounded to me. I don't know whether it's the.
Do we want to talk about the translation? Do we want to just open completely the weeds like that?
Let's go ahead. I'm gonna put a pin in translation, and yes, let's talk about it at some point. But first of all, so that people don't start clicking and turning off the podcast, what are we talking about this week? We're talking about a famous film from 1958 called
The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman.
Online, but maybe
Ingmar, the Bergman, which I think means mountain man.
You do not need to do else this quickly. The Bergman, Ingmar.
Ingmar, opening the Seventh Seal.
Welcome back to
the Dead.
Not Fear of the Reaper. All right, we need to stop that immediately.
Asking the God question. Anyway, sorry. All right. This is a famous film. We're going to say it's at least famous. It's highly acclaimed. I was actually kind of surprised that the Metacritic score was only 88. That seems kind of low for one of these type of films.
It's black and white. It is definitely not a movie that's interested in holding your hand. By 6 minutes in, you're just expected to understand that you're following parallel journeys of body and soul.
I would not be surprised if the Rotten Tomatoes score was low. I'm talking about Metacritic. Metacritic is, if I'm not mistaken, aggregates like intelligent film reviewers, doesn't it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure off the top of my head if Metacritic is aggregating audience scores as well at this point.
If it includes audience, then yes, that would make sense. Black and white right away. I mean, it's just going to be a problem for
black and white, foreign language. I would actually hesitate to say highfalutin. It is certainly a very serious film in some ways. It is also surprising that in other ways it is kind of not.
You could definitely call it earthy in some
You
way.
could, yeah. In the way that a lot of things actually from the Middle Ages, like Canterbury Tales, or
I was going to say, we'll get into this later, but my take was this is kind of like, what if Canterbury Tales was also The Catcher in the Rye?
Why Catcher in the Rye? Just because of the existential dread and the wandering around, and
you got it in one.
Okay, all right, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, let's try to. I mean, a lot of people might not know this movie. I think there might be some people out
although
there.
Although they've definitely seen something that references it.
Anyone out there who hasn't seen this movie, if you saw some stills from the film, you would realize a million things that have been inspired by it, and maybe even have seen these shots before. They're very famous.
And something else this vision of death is extremely iconic.
Extremely iconic. Although I did have something that I learned about. I might as well talk about it right now. But if you guys remember the movie Meet Joe Black.
Yes. I actually haven't seen that one, but yeah.
I haven't seen it either, but I thought about it because I thought Antonius Block, and I was like, oh, maybe Joe Black is from that. But then I realized there's an old movie from the 30s called Death Takes a Holiday, which is Meet Joe Black is a remake.
A remake of that, right.
Holiday. That movie actually precedes The Seventh Seal by about 20 years. So
it's a movie from the 30s? Okay.
Yeah, that movie from the 30s. Yeah, the original one. I'm thinking it's more likely to have influenced this than the other way around, strangely enough. I thought that was... so the idea of death as a character in a film precedes this by quite a bit, weirdly. I thought that's candidate for a big surprise for me. I would have thought
we can kind of come back to that as well, because I think there's also a lot to say about like how this movie is also surprisingly modernist in a lot of ways.
Did you say modernist or modern?
For the former, modernist.
Modernist. Okay. Well, yeah, definitely put a pin in that. I'm interested in hearing what you want to say about that. But let me just describe what the movie is very briefly. It's set in Sweden during the Black Death. So that'd be about 1348, 49, something like that. And the main character is a knight who's just come back from the Crusades, which is not something that happened in 1348. But anyway, we can talk about some of the anachronisms later. But essentially, he comes back, and it's not really obvious that the countryside has been ravaged by the plague. That doesn't really seem to be apparent until...
No, so this movie, you could say a lot of things about this movie are not readily apparent. Like, I feel like this movie opens extremely cold and then like gradually explains itself as you go on. It opens with just I was wondering if they were shipwrecked or something. Tony's Block and his squire Jens just wake up on the seashore, lying on some rocks.
Yeah, that was very read that they were shipwrecked. And the first person...
But they have horses.
One horse, actually.
They have a horse. Yeah, that's true. That is a little strange. I think it's...
Do horses swim?
I saw some takes on this. Horses do swim. Yes, horses are actually pretty good swimmers. Some of the takes I saw on this is that the beach represents birth and death. So they start out on the beach randomly, having been dropped there inexplicably, because that's how life starts. The movie ends up on the beach again, but that's just...
So I wouldn't call this movie dreamlike exactly, but there are a lot of bits that kind of primarily work on a symbolic level. But at the same time, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a David Lynch style thing where you can't really read it on the surface level without it not have it make sense.
I literally have a quote from David Lynch that I was about to read when you were talking about that, because he was commenting on this director, and I think it's Tarkovsky.
So that's a guy.
He was saying that, people shouldn't expect art to make sense because they're used to life not making sense, and just take his movies that way. It's like life. It's not going to make sense.
That's a very Lynchian quote.
You beat me to it. I was going to say that verbatim.
So anyway, essentially, in terms of a plot, what happens is Antonius Block the Knight.
This is a movie about a sad knight.
This is a movie about a troubled knight. I don't know if sad would be I
think sad is a pretty able description of him.
Sad covers some of it, but he's more haunted by what he's seen in the Crusades and things, maybe traumatized a little bit, but also
I think you can make a very valid reading of this movie as being a movie about depression. I guess that's a mark of a rich movie that we keep stepping over ourselves to talk about it. But we'll maybe come back to that. But I think you can make it. I think that is a very valid reading of this movie as well.
That's interesting. I didn't really process it. I just processed it as the existential questions, as the angst that comes from asking existential questions.
Oh, that's certainly a huge part of it too. But I think I'll just go ahead and say it. Since we're at the time, if you want to read this movie on a literal level, you can read this. I think is on a literal level, and all the death stuff is his internal monologue essentially. But I think at a surface level, you can read this as a knight who's come back from the Crusades. He's traumatized and disillusioned by everything he's seen and done. He no longer gets any solace in the church. He's traumatized and depressed. He's haunted by the specter of death. Literally, he's literally thinking about death almost constantly. And in particular, there's a line near the end when he finally reaches the castle in his home and reunites with his wife. And she asks him, she's like, you're back from the Crusades. Are you sorry? Are you sorry about anything you've done? And he says, I'm not sorry about anything, but I am tired. And that is an extremely, extremely clinically depressed thing to say.
He seems to get awfully involved in life throughout the course.
He does, but he also talks about how numb he is, how he's looking for one thing to do to get to finally give himself some meaning. There's a bit where he's so ridiculously touched by just having a brief meal with somebody because the rest of his life feels so bleak.
The milk and the strawberries, and he holds up the milk and states that this is a treasured memory that he will have forever. Which I don't know. Have you ever seen anyone else do that in the moment?
Don't you think that's that way sometimes? Don't you ever just have a really nice moment and you're like, I'm going to try to remember this one. But
I usually don't make a speech about it either. That's another thing too. The vlog is kind of pretentious. That was a little surprising for me as well. That he's kind of the most pretentious person in the movie. Death is much more lighthearted than he is.
That's true. I don't think Block makes a single joke, and Death definitely does. But then Death is not obviously as troubled by the things that are going on. He's not the one that's going to die.
No, if you want to talk about existentialism, Death is like, I've got a job and I do it, and I'm not really worried about anything.
Right. He's like Sisyphus, happy, rolling the boulder up the hill. And
I don't know. They both have a sense of kind of ironic humor in their wordplay with each other.
I think when you're saying about Bloch's character being sort of pretentious, I think that right there is always a hallmark that a movie was once a play, because it's just the way you write plays. The main character has monologues and goes on about things. It's just what you do in a play, in a stage play.
So did you
play?
Exactly. Yeah,
it did. Yeah, exactly. So I think sometimes what comes across in a film, you're like, why is this guy talking so much? Because films usually seek to portray real conversations, if you know what I mean.
That's true. This is an extremely, extremely wordy movie.
It is. And like we covered Casablanca before on the podcast, and it's the same thing. It was originally a stage play. They did adapt it to make it not quite as speechy, but it's a very talky movie in a good way, I think. And this one is too. It's got a really good, even I don't speak Swedish at all. My German allows me to understand a good number of the words that are being said, but so I can hear the rhythms of it, and I'm like, it sounds good. It sounds like good speech. It rhymes correctly and things like that.
It was a contemporary of something like Bridge on the River Kwai, which I believe came out in the same year, and is also a surprisingly talky movie.
I saw it years and years ago. I don't remember it terribly well. I remember liking it quite a bit.
I mean, it's also possibly the case that like movies were still like heavily influenced by plays as a form and hadn't quite found the full visual language of cinema yet.
Sure. Which I think this one is well known to be revolutionary in telling the visual medium, or showing the visual medium in this way. The way that shots are blocked, the way that he uses light and shadow in a lot of different scenes. It's a really pretty movie. That's maybe what stands out most to me.
I saw a quote somewhere that was talking about, and I've heard this said about other movies before, but every single shot could be a painting. I kind of played around with that notion looking through the film, and it's not 100% true, but it is true-ish. Like a lot of the shots, where they're cast from and things like that, like they're from underneath, and the guy's got his head turned, and there's a skylight over his head, just in a quiet moment. Things like that go on through. I mean, obviously the opening with the beach is beautiful, and there's a long shot with the horse on the beach and things like that. And yeah, I could see that being painted on your wall.
Another standout for me was the nighttime scene. And I think a lot of movies really lose their way when they're doing day for night, which obviously have to do with the film stock when you're filming in black.
Actually, Bridge on the River Kwai was terrible about that. That's the one thing I remember is there's a shot where they're planting explosive on the bridge and swimming underneath, and you can just see it's daylight and it's supposed to be night. And I remember it taking me out of the movie when I was a little kid.
Do you remember how this movie handled that?
No, what was the scene that was at night? I'm trying to remember.
It's kind of an overhead shot looking down, and what you're looking down onto is basically the earth and the ground that's all black, and the people walking around them are dressed lightly, and one of them has a torch. And so you don't have to worry about showing the skyline because you're pointing down at the ground. So all you see is it's dark.
Is that in the castle or no? You're talking about an exterior shot.
That's when they camp right before they run into the thief who has the plague. When Death is playing for the third time.
I don't think I got that was supposed to be nighttime. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about when they run into the guy and she wants to give him water and he says no. And
before that, when they're the establishing shot, when it's looking down at the camp and the juggler is walking around with a torch. And anyway, it stood out to me as being really, really impressive. That's another thing that leads to this sort of surreal unreality of the whole story. It starts on the beach and ends on the beach, but it also takes a course of one entire day, starting at dawn and ending at the next dawn.
Does it really? I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, I was paying pretty close attention.
The time sequence wasn't clear to me, but yeah, okay. So it's the first day begins on the beach, and then they have a night. They go through the forest and they have a night, and then the next. Okay,
they go to the inn. They have lunch. They go to the forest. It becomes night. Sunset is when they're having the milk and the strawberries. Dawn breaks the next day in the castle when the unnamed servant girl sees light come through and Death walks through, and then we have the end scene of the movie.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they were traveling through night through the castle. I forgot about that part. Yeah.
Well, let's pause for a second about that and let's have our drink. Let's talk about what we're having to drink for that show. As soon as I thought of it being Swedish, I was just like, I've never had akvavit, so that's what I got. It looks like you've got the same brand. It looks like you've gone with the wrong country as well, right?
I have.
Yeah.
I mean, in our defense, they are traveling on the way to Elsinore, which
Elsinore, I think, is supposed to be in Denmark, though. Oh, well, mine's from Norway. Sorry, my apologies. Are we not from the same?
Oh, yeah.
Those like the same bottle, I thought.
It looks like we have the same thing.
Have you tried any of yours yet?
No, I just opened it, pouring it over some ice. I know that the Scandinavians differ upon what they think, whether or not you should do ice or chill. I didn't see anybody talk about ice, and a lot of them drink it like as a shot.
The website for this one says you are supposed to drink it at room temperature.
Yeah, see, that's how the Norwegians drink it, and they said the Swedes drink it cold, but almost everybody drinks it as a shot. Although the Norwegians drink it slowly, but at room temperature, and the Swedes do it as shots. And I didn't see what the Danes, and I don't know if the Icelanders.
All right, so we're trying one of each. Nice. Yeah. Whereas yes, this week, since I am a little sick, I am the designated driver of this pod.
Oh, it's not actually unlike Ouzo, is it? It's maybe not as pungent. It's not as strong of a taste as Ouzo, but it's in that realm.
I went to the same ABC store where I bought the Ouzo last time, and this was on the same shelf, directly above the Ouzo.
Did you get the sweats when you saw the bottle?
No, I actually still have some of the Ouzo. It just you and Bill enjoyed it a lot more than me, I think.
Okay.
I was hoping that the Ouzo was your drink for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze.
No, that would have been great. No, it was for the Guns of Navarone, which takes place in Greece.
You could have done Retsina for that one.
Retsina? Yeah, we talked about Retsina in the podcast, but we didn't drink that. We had Ouzo instead. We could have done that.
Are you getting the sherry barrel finish with this?
So basically what this is it's a neutral grain spirit like vodka, but it's seasoned with, it has to be dill or caraway. And if it's if it were Swedish, it would have to have fennel in it, which I feel like I can almost taste fennel, but maybe I don't know the difference between what dill, caraway, and fennel. I could think of what a fennel seed tastes like. But yeah, you've got a little bit of color to it, I'm guessing from the aging process, right? Didn't you say?
Well, these are aged in sherry barrels. I believe the flavoring comes from coriander and orange peel. And this one famously is also sailed around the world and I think aged for 16 months in sherry barrels.
Yeah, you put it on a ship from Scandinavia down to Australia and then back, meaning it crosses the equator 2 times, and that's why the brand is called Linea. It means line, or I don't know if that literally means equator, probably not, but I guess it means some line. But anyway, that's what we've got here. I don't mind it. I actually think it's kind of like a milder version of Ouzo. It's a little tastier than Ouzo to me. A little less, no, tastier is the wrong word. It's just a little less offensive than Ouzo.
I think it is both tastier and less offensive than Ouzo. It's got a pleasing finish. Yeah, it's a little hard to describe. I bet cold you probably are getting less flavor from it.
Yeah, I would, but I really don't mind it. I could drink this. I kind of was picturing it the way Russians drink vodka. It's just like something to get drunk off of that doesn't have much of a taste, but that's not this at all. This is actually pretty good, I think.
It's rather pleasant.
So it means, I think it's pretty clear it means water of life, which is, I think, like pretty much a literal translation of what whiskey means in Gaelic, too.
Yeah.
So somehow that idea got all over Europe, that things.
What's vodka mean?
Vodka means water.
So they just left off the life part.
Yeah, I think so. And it may have had something like that in there, but yeah, voda means water. So vodka, I think, just kind of means like little water, or watery something. That's the general etymology of it. No, I kind of like that. That's just fine. I was talking about the synopsis, and as usual, I didn't get through it, even though I wrote down like about a 2-sentence synopsis. An important part of the story, I think, that most people will be familiar with from this is that there's a chess game, which is essentially when death and the knight meet at the beginning of the story. The knight comes up with the idea of stalling death by playing chess against death, and saying that, he agrees that he won't take him until after the game is over. So that's going on in the background throughout the entire movie. And I don't know, are there any other symbols? Why chess?
So I was thinking about that a little bit because like it is a symbolic game, like being played like kind of on a symbolic level in this movie. That especially struck me when the part where death is maybe or maybe not cheating, trying to probe him for information when he goes to confessional and he mistakes death for the priest. And there's a bit where he's talking about his strategy. And he says, "I have a combination of bishop and knight. and like a knight talking to a priest in that, like talking about combining a bishop and knight, kind of pained me like, is there like a layer of symbolism here that I'm not quite getting on top of that?
I think it's a I don't know what the word for it is, but it's like not quite symbolism. I mean, it is symbolic, but it's not like you shouldn't read each character as a particular chess piece, but they're sort of reminiscent of chess pieces. I was thinking about it while we were watching it. I know he was inspired by there's a medieval painting in Sweden of a skeleton, an emaciated skeleton figure playing chess with a knight.
And I mean, and that's practically directly referenced. Like when Block challenges Death, he says, "I know that I know that you're a great player of games. I've seen all the pictures."
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, that he may have been going from that, but maybe the characters are also pieces. It's interesting. There isn't really a game being played, if you know what I mean, by what the characters do. They just go on this sort of,
they're players in the game of life, but not in the game of chess so much.
How you play the game of life is definitely a theme in this movie.
Absolutely, yeah. So definitely, like there's a reasonably direct comparison being made between Antonius Block, our knight, and a character we haven't mentioned yet, Yoff, who is kind of like the holy fool of this movie, who is the other character in this movie that sees death, the other character in this movie that has visions.
Yep.
But he is also a character whereas Block is a character who's tied to death because he's a knight, he's a killer, even if we don't actually see him engage in violence.
Oh, whereas he also sees Mary and Jesus.
Yes, yeah. Yoff sees Mary and Jesus.
He's the only character in the movie he's the only character in the movie that sees Mary and Jesus, and he's the only one that is saved at the end of the movie. So maybe
his wife and child also survived.
Right, but I think in a very biblical, old-timey kind of way, a wife and child are like possessions of the man. If you know what I mean. Like,
you can read it that way.
They get saved because they're his property. I mean, I don't know. I was just thinking everybody else.
I think it also means that he is tied to life in a way that Block isn't, because he has his wife and he has a child with him, and he's also like a player, and he's earthy and connected to life in ways that Block is not.
Yeah. The thing that jumped out to me immediately with those two was that he's named Joff and she's Mia, which translate into Joseph and Mary.
Although their son is like Matthias.
Son is Mikhail, right?
Mikhail.
Not a direct relation, but
not really
the seventh seal.
Yeah, not really
married together as a couple.
Yeah.
Who opens is it Gabriel that opens the seventh seal? Do we know?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Or that's a good question.
Gabriel
announces it, but I'm not sure if Gabriel does the uncorking proper.
Yeah. I don't know that I watched this and I just loved the movie as much as I've loved other things, but there is a lot to talk about. There's a lot of symbolism.
Yeah, that ties into my biggest surprise, which I think I'll leave for later. But
yes. Let's put on the biggest
that is something else that was on my mind.
Should we maybe talk about some of the other players in the movie?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So let's do cast of characters. So we got Antonius Block. We talked about him a fair bit already.
That's the knight.
That's the knight. We have Death, who has a lot of presence, even if you can't really call him he doesn't really have a plot line or a character. He bounces off the others, but he's a memorable guy. We have the players. So, we have Yoff, who his wife Mia.
Baby Michael, and then there's the other guy who is.
I've got his name written down here somewhere. He also struck me because I think he has one of the few people in this movie who has a personal name and a surname. I sense he might have given it to himself to put on airs and mac on women, as we see him do.
Yeah, everybody else is there's Plog. Well, Antonius Block has.
Well, we did him first. Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. But I mean, he's got a surname. He's got two names.
Oh yeah. We have Antonius Squire Jens.
I think, is it pronounced Jens?
It's like Jens or Juns.
Juns or something like that. I think he's my favorite character. I love watching that guy whenever he's on screen. I mean, I really like Max von Sydow is terrific, mostly just his face and his delivery. Everything about his voice is spectacular. But the character of Jons has like a humor about him that just I enjoy his scenes a lot.
Yeah, so he's placed really interestingly.
The Squire has this world-weary aspect about him, and he's always getting a read on people and predicting what they'll say, and he's usually right.
Right.
So he's interesting. In some ways, he's kind of the worldliest character because when he's interacting with Block, he kind of plays the knave. He plays the fool. He's kind of puncturing Block's more highfalutin tendencies.
Right.
But then when he's talking to the earthier, lower status people, then he's kind of the witty urbane one in contrast to them.
Yeah, I think he has the capacity to be both things. He sort of performs as a swing between the two states.
It's definitely the character that has the most outstanding performance, I think. There are some really interesting decisions he makes. Like every time he and Block share a scene together and Block walks off, he kind of hisses at him like a cat when he turns his I have no idea what that's about, but it's fascinating to watch.
I think the direction, those three, they come across so well. Antonius, Max von Sydow, the actor who plays Death, Bengt McArthur is the guy who plays Death, and then, like we said, Jons, the Squire. I think all three of them are really just a lot is being gotten out of the actors because I think the director's doing a terrific job. He's really I think guiding them in the choices that they're making. I mean, if it was just one person in the movie, I'd say, oh, that guy's a brilliant actor. I hate to use this, seems like kind of a trite example in light of how prestigious this film is, but like Quentin Tarantino's movies, a couple of the best ones, you can see he's just getting everything out of the actors, like really getting it's some of their most iconic performances of their entire careers, a lot of them. And I think it has to do with
I was struck very early on. Like there's a bit, like I think it's like On the Seashore when Antonius Block like reflexively kneels down to pray, and then like you can see him like making an effort to like break that habit. Max von Sydow was doing a tremendous amount with like just the movement of his arms in that little bit.
What else is he from, Max von Sydow? I know he's had a long career. Was he in like The Omen?
Yes, I believe he was. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because I remember he was in the new Star Wars. That was one of the final parts of his career.
I was about to say how quickly they forget. Yeah.
No, I remembered that, but I know that's not one of the
Minority Report, Flash Gordon.
Okay. I just pulled up his Wikipedia. He was very busy in the 80s. Yeah.
Was he Ming?
Oh, I think he was.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that in so long. I don't really remember it very well, but that's interesting.
Yeah, he's Ming in that. Yeah, and he's also in like Conan the Barbarian.
Okay.
Lynch's Dune. Yeah, he got around quite a bit.
How could you forget him from Judge Dredd?
I've never seen Judge Dredd. That's how.
That's how we do. That's how.
Don't tell Paul.
The Stallone Judge Dredd. I do have to make sure we get the right.
He was in Game of Thrones apparently. So Max von Sydow, long and prestigious and noteworthy career.
Yeah, definitely.
And he was certainly the only actor I recognize in this.
And it's really amazing to me. And this is common with people from Scandinavia, but his English is like impeccable when he's in movies. And just to have been from another country and to be able to speak both languages, that's such an impressive thing that people from Northern Europe do a lot of the time, is speak English so well. Maybe
he's multilingual. He speaks, I think, Italian and French fluently as well, and was also in The Exorcist. That's another big one.
Oh, is that what I was thinking of? Not The Omen?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, okay. My bad. I'm not super familiar with that movie, actually. I've only seen The Exorcist one time, and it was a long time ago.
There's Unnamed Girl.
I was very curious about like what her deal was. Yeah, like what the point of her being in the movie is. Like the scene where she's introduced is definitely like fairly important, but then like her coming along on the rest of the movie seems kind of marginal.
What about the fact that she never speaks except for the last line of the movie?
Yeah, there's that.
Well, not last line technically.
What did she say? What did she say? I must have.
It is over.
Huh. Yeah, or it is finished, depending on your translation. So,
right.
See, that's where the question. So, how do we all watch this? I watched it on the streaming service formerly known as HBO Max via the Criterion Collection.
Me too. On Max.
I watched it on Amazon.
Oh, was it also like the Criterion version? Do you remember? Did they get the logo up front?
I'm not sure. I don't think I saw that, but I couldn't swear to it.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure I remember it being like it is finished rather than it is over. So I'm wondering if it was a different translation print possibly.
I suspect the "it is finished" is the correct translation because that is one of the Jesus on the cross statements.
Is it? I don't remember that. But I've recently learned my understanding of the New Testament is extremely limited. Like I went to a comedy show the other day as a Jewish comic, and he was talking about the Beatitudes. And he was like, the Beatitudes, the one where he says, blessed are the, and I was like, oh, right, Beatitudes, blessings. Yeah, that would be what that is. I have no idea. Like, I just never went to church. I went through a Bible phase, but it was all reading the Old Testament. I never got into the New Testament. I am aware that there's one book of Revelation, singular, not Revelation.
The Revelation of St. John the Divine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that it's cavalry, not Calvary, when it comes to war.
That is one of my pet peeves.
Yes, that's a pet peeve of mine as well. When people talk about cavalry, there is sort of a fleeting L in that word as well. Anyways,
Only villains would speak of the cavalry.
Villains.
Yeah.
So what did you guys think of the translation? Did you notice anything being up with the translation?
Again, my Swedish certainly would not is certainly not up to the task of comparing that at all. Like when you're watching a movie in a language you don't understand, it can be very, very easy to just kind of tune out the actual dialogue when you're focusing on the subtitles, or maybe that's just my problem.
I think I know, like I said before, I think I know just enough German that I can tell what people are talking about, especially when I see subtitles. I'm like, oh, this is the line. I hear a couple of words where I'm like, yes, this is what's actually on the screen, and this is what they're saying. Like I'm mentally comparing the two things over and like, and I pick up a couple of words like yog means I and things like that. Like I started learning a couple of basic words so I could kind of follow what was happening through the not follow what was happening, but follow the dialogue and not have that effect that you're talking about. Like if I watch something in Korean, I have no idea what anybody's saying at all.
Yeah. So I just kind of try to keep an ear out for like how people's names were pronounced. That's as far as I go.
There's a couple. I remember I watched a movie that was Danish one time, and it was during Christmas, that people kept saying "Glade Jule," and I was like, "Oh, that means Merry Christmas." Glad that I can kind of remember that. Actually, what inspired me to pick this film was I heard a podcast about it. BBC's. There's a podcast they do that's just they take a random subject and they do an hour-long episode about it, and they did one about the Seventh Seal. And they were talking about some of the Swedish dialogue. It's very, very good. Like when you hear it broken down, like the choices that are being made in the words, it's finely written dialogue for the film. It, like we said, it comes from a play, and I think it shows.
Yeah, and I think like at least like some of the actors like were in the play,
right?
Or at least had like worked together.
Tremendously difficult thing to judge anytime you're
extremely
getting a foreign language product. How it flows in its own language and how that impacts the presentation of it.
I think so. It is hard. I think it sounded like it flowed well. I remember when rap was a fairly new thing, right, in America, and it started to get a little better over the course of about 10 years. The lyrics started to flow a little better. And I didn't really understand what was happening until I heard the first time I ever heard rap in Spanish and French, and I could hear that it wasn't flowing correctly. And over time, all of a sudden, I started hearing French and Spanish rap, and I was like, they figured it out too, because it was a different process for their language to adapt the words to the music. Mm-hmm. And I could tell when they got it right, if you know what I mean. Even though I'm not a native speaker, like I could hear when they were getting the when it was scanning properly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think you can hear when somebody's speaking another language and it's got the right music to it. If you're
right flow, familiar
with the language, but especially because Swedish, not the most different from English language there is in the world. It's in the same sort of neck of the woods and language families.
Weirdly, that makes me think of Eddie Izzard, who's famously one of the few comedians who has performed in multiple languages, which is kind of a
extremely difficult
achievement if you think about it, because the laugh lines are at different places. You have to structure the jokes differently. It's just.
I saw a stand-up comic who was French perform his entire bit in English. And it was like watching a dog walk on his hind legs. It was a very impressive performance. Like he was funny. Like he was funny in English. And you were just like, I kept thinking, this must be hilarious when he does it in his native language, because it's good in English. And it was a very impressive thing to watch.
I think one other character we should talk about at least a little is Raval. That's a guy's whose pronunciation I did miss.
I wanted to make, you're bringing up the characters, and I did want to make one observation before I forget about it. Mm-hmm. The way they pick up characters throughout the course of the movie reminds me of The Wizard of Oz. Like they keep meeting these people, and they keep adding them to the sort of coterie of people that's going through and then they take this journey together. And I think that may not be an accident, because they're both allegories. And there may be something about allegory. I mean, Canterbury Tales is, well, they don't really pick them up over the journey, do they? They're sort of all at the beginning of the journey. But perhaps characters that are allegories, it kind of makes sense to sort of accrue them as you go, so that you focus on them one by one. But I don't know. Maybe there's something to that connection. Anyway, you were talking about Raval, right? Is that his name?
Yes, Raval, or at least that's how it's written. I might be butchering the pronunciation, but yeah. So he's an interesting character. He just comes in and out of the movie so randomly. We first meet him like as a thief. He's like going through a house where presumably like the owners died of the plague, and he's like looting the body. And Yuns comes across him, and not only does he disapprove of the grave robbing, he takes much greater offense to the fact that Reval was apparently at the time
inspired them to go on the crusade in the
yes,
faith.
yeah, he used to be a priest. Yeah, in point of fact, yeah, like they sometimes refer to him as they call me Dr. Mirabilis, which I meant to look up. Like that rings a bell, but I don't actually remember what it means off the top of my head.
What did they say about Dr. Mirabilis?
The subtitles in my version of the movie had Yuns calling him a Dr. Mirabilis, but I don't remember what that means exactly.
I don't remember what that means either. I think I think I saw that, and I was thinking that, like you said, that rings a bell. But maybe I'm just thinking of Annus Mirabilis. I don't know, but
I believe it means he's a theologian.
Yeah, well, that would make sense. You sent.
Okay, that's why I remember. Okay, there's a novel by that name, which is what I'm thinking of.
Okay.
And apparently there was something that. Okay, so apparently that was like an epithet applied to Roger Bacon.
Ah.
So I guess he's like,
yeah,
so I guess that's the medieval version of look at the big brain on bread.
A comparison can be made between these two words.
I think we see a remake on the horizon.
Wasn't Roger Bacon famous for being the last person to have like read everything?
Yeah, to know everything. Yeah, I think he's one of the people who's cited as being the last to know everything. Yeah, that sounds about him, or Erasmus or somebody like that around that same time.
I think to have read
Bacon's before that. Bacon's well before Erasmus, I think, but still.
But yeah, so we meet Reval as a thief and a scavenger. We are told that he used to be a priest. Yun spares his life in that scene, and he then goes on to turn up later in a tavern, tormenting the fool of the players, Yoff.
Yeah, he shows up kind of like Walrus Man and the Doctor in the cantina scene when they like try to get Luke killed for no reason. Like that's what I was thinking. They're in that bar and the poor guy ends up dancing, and he'd like in order to live. It seemed like something from a Western. Where you're like dance pilgrim and like shooting at the guy's feet, and it seemed like
very much so.
People must have thought of that when they did those
and winds up with a horrible facial scar. Yeah,
that's the actor's scar, right?
No idea.
I don't think so.
You don't think? I mean, it looks real. It looks
the
like
Squire marked him up.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I thought he cut his eyes out until the next time we saw him.
I'm talking about the Squire. The Squire has a wicked scar.
Yun's scar looks totally real. Yeah.
It looks real. Yeah, no, not what happens to
he's got like a divot like along his hairline. That looks pretty real.
That's makeup. But I'm talking about the Squire himself has a gnarly scar that really adds some
character.
Squire, it seems like exactly the kind of sword scar that you would have if you were that character. It's perfect. But I think that's something throughout the movie. These faces, part of it is Swedish people, right? They're sort of, I think, famous for having beautiful physiognomy, right? But these faces are amazing. Every single
Esposito in particular is like every
Max
time the light hits
is
him,
just you just would like want to look at his face because it's, I don't know if I'd say the guy's handsome, but it's just a really interesting face.
Yeah, interesting is good. Yeah, there was one particular scene where like he's shot at such a particular angle that like he looked like a Muppet. He looked like Guy Smiley or one of the Muppets with like the huge emphasized jaw.
Wow. Which reminds me of something which we haven't talked about yet, which is Death in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Who, when I was a kid, it just seemed like, he's like a creepy Swedish guy. That makes sense for Death. I didn't know that was a reference to something. Like it just seemed appropriate to me.
Yeah, whereas I did recognize the reference, even though I had not seen this movie at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, same. That is 100% a fake scar.
Oh, wow.
The one on the Squire.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Shout outs to their
that is putty and a shaved scalp where they put the putty over the top.
It's great. Maybe it wouldn't work if it was a colorized. But it's terrific in black and white. It looks
it is very effective, and it lends credence to him in that. Apparently, he's a pretty famous actor himself, and was also famed for playing very different roles. Like this is
I looked up these actors because I just thought they were so good, and they're just all over Swedish film, but not except for Max von Sydow. I don't think in anything that you would have seen. Both of the women who are in the movie. Sorry, there's 3 of them, and they're all
Four.
There's
the 2 wives. There's the mute girl.
Oh, the wife.
3 wives,
the wife.
Actually,
I forgot about Antonius Block's wife. Right, I forgot about her.
And the witch.
Oh, and the witch.
And the witch.
Yeah, the witches we're talking about briefly. Yeah, the witch. Yeah,
I thought that scene, the scene with the witch, the second one where she's actually being put up to burn,
where she's coherent.
The emotional content of the movie just completely shifted gears for me there. It was very intense. Like that scene was very intense, I thought, for some reason. And it changed how I saw the rest of the movie. At first, it was sort of, there's these long scenes with them doing their play and doing music. It's kind of goofy. There's like a goofy thread to it. Like, and some of the death scenes, even though the knight's lines are intense, they're played for a little bit of humor. But I thought with the witch burning scene, it just like all of a sudden completely changed the way I felt watching the movie.
And then you can't really do a funny witch burning scene.
No, well, you could. You could.
Not in this movie, but yeah.
But this one is played for, well, this would be a really horrible thing to see and a really horrible thing to have happen. And I think it came across it was intense, I thought.
So I'm going to circle back here a little bit to a pin we set earlier, which is talking about how I read this as a very modernist movie.
Okay, go ahead. Tell me what that.
So, and by that I mean, like, I feel like this is a movie very much about this kind of character study of Block. I think it's probably not too extreme to say that like everything in the movie ultimately reflects on or revolves around Block or his state of mind. And so this is like kind of a psychological, and this is like a very psychologically realist reading of like A Night Back from the Crusades. Even though this is a movie with like where multiple characters have visions, have ecstatic or terrific visions, this is not a movie that has a lot of awe of the divine or a sense of the numinous. And so a big part of that is, even though Yoff himself, his faith in like, the Virgin Mary and Jesus and all that is kind of his saving grace, the church itself is pretty consistently depicted as a negative. All the people we see associated with the church, there's the flagellants who like explicitly show up to be a huge downer and disrupt the performance.
I literally wrote the note, these flagellants are a big Debbie Downer. They're like they're having this great thing, and then the flagellants come through, and it's like, oh, come on.
Yeah. That is a really fast way to end any stage production, is to have the plague-ridden flagellants walk through wailing.
Yeah. Really kills the buzz. Yeah, we have 2 scenes of like, church knights tormenting and then killing the witch. And specifically, twice in the movie, death is mistaken for a priest.
Yeah,
I think that is like a really direct like summation of this movie's view of the church. It's bad. It's a downer. It is a negative life sucker. And so I think that's a mark that is a mark of like this show's modernist perspective. It is very much in a God is dead. I could see like an earlier version of this movie about a knight who's lost his faith, but like the church would at least be. But like there would at least be the possibility of the church being a comfort or a succor to this character, and that is not at all possible in this movie.
Do you think that the person we encounter, that the squire talks to for that piece of time, is a member of the church, the one that's painting?
No, he's probably an artisan that's been hired.
No. Yeah, I think.
I would think. I don't know.
He's a janitor on the Death Star. He's working for the church, but I don't think he's religious.
He had a lot of really important information to pass on. To include, the fact that the plague was coming, the symptoms of the plague, what happens with the plague, what people are afraid of, what's happening in the country, people dancing, people flagellating themselves. There's a lot there.
Sure. That guy was very helpful in terms of like laying out, of making sense of the film.
Yeah. I was interested in what your definition of modernism is, but I think I understand what you're talking about. You're settling. You're talking about modern. You're going back to like early turn of the century types of novels, like Virginia Woolf era.
Yes,
like that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think asking the God question is exactly that. That's the time period. So to me, exactly. This is the second thing. I mean, I'm not saying you're not. I'm not saying you're wrong. I think this work is rich enough to have multiple interpretations. You're focusing on the character of Antonius Block. When I saw it, I'm having a conversation with Ingmar Bergman. I'm looking for what he thinks about the world and about God and about life and what happens when we die and why is faith. Why are we sent into the world to have faith instead of just being shown that there's God? Like his questions about all those things, almost like theodicy. It's not quite theodicy, but it's a similar kind of question. Like, why would God do things this way when he could do it a different way, sort of questions. But that's interesting because the way you're talking about it with depression and about Block and stuff, is a completely different way to approach it than how I was watching the film. It may have something to do. Do you remember the bathroom at my parents' house that had all the New York Times articles on the wall?
Yeah.
There were these pictures by I can't remember the artist's name.
Hirschfeld.
Hirschfeld. I was going to say Hirschberg. Okay, right.
Yeah, I think Al Hirschfeld.
I can't remember, but anyway,
Nina. Just remember the Ninas.
Distinctive style of his cartoons, and whoever the people that owned the house before us cut out a bunch of pages from the style section.
I think it might have just been like arts.
Yeah, I think it's actually arts. And put these all over the wall, and one of them was a little blurb, and it said, "Ingmar Bergman is still asking the God question." So I remember looking at that as like a 6-year-old and wondering, who's Ingmar Bergman? You know, like thinking about this for years and years. So when I watch this movie, I'm picturing Ingmar Bergman the whole time, like just as the generator of this film and the person who's asking me this question. And maybe that's just the perspective that got nailed into my head by seeing the bathroom like that. The other day, Karina put on this movie about Golda Meir, the one with Helen Mirren, and I walked in the room looking at it, and I was like, oh, I know, it looks just like Golda Meir. And she's like, you mean from the picture in your parents' bathroom? And I was like, yep. That's exactly.
It was very distinctive, right by Al Pacino and near Robert Picardo. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. I think that sounds about right. Yeah.
I would love you to just isolate that and make that your ringtone or something, just so we can have that out of context quote of "looks like Golda Meir." Oh, from your parents' bathroom.
Yeah, that's a little non sequitur if you don't know me, but everybody who knows me knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's a very memorable bathroom.
Yes, I preserved it. It had gotten damaged over the years, so I had to get rid of the lower half of it all, but I took photos before I did so it is preserved for posterity, but we put a veneer over and saved the top half, so we do still have that in the bathroom at the old house.
Nice.
Yeah,
I did like that. But no, no, I agree with you, Dave. Yeah, this is definitely like, again, this is definitely like a movie made to be. There's a lot in this movie, and so there are a lot of different lenses you can bring to view on it. So I think that's certainly like, you know, a valid way of reading.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that about modernism, because, like I said earlier in the pod, we were talking about Canterbury Tales and the Decameron, and the Decameron is like pretty famously sort of a proto-modernist text, right? Because it's examining the plague and how everybody just sees the world as godless because of the plague. And so this movie is about the plague. It's very easy for people to lose their faith and become despairing during a plague. And I saw something else that someone was talking about with this movie. I was just, like I said, approaching it as existentialist questions and God is dead in the early 20th century and stuff. And then I realized, but it's also 1958. It's the first couple years of knowing that the world could be destroyed by nuclear weapons. And so you've got this, it's like the plague. It's like, how could God exist in a world where the Holocaust just happened and we all could die tomorrow because of nuclear weapons? It's a different kind of existential question. Very similar, we did the podcast about Godzilla, and it's got that's the theme of the whole movie, is like, there's this inexorable force that could destroy us all. I don't know it's called Godzilla now that I think of it. But anyway, I don't know if God is a theme in that film, but probably not. But in this one, I think that's part of the dread of this movie.
You just blew my mind there a little bit, Dave.
Something that jumped out to me is that the squire does at one point refer to himself as a modern man, which did make me chuckle a bit. And I think he probably is much more a modern man, at least in terms of his viewpoints, than the knight himself.
Roger Bacon would have been described the same way.
The knight's view is that he wants to speak to the devil to find out about God, whereas the squire is more of the opinion that none of this actually matters and you should just enjoy life while you can.
Right. And it seems to me like the knight figures that out a little bit with why do I want to say the watermelons? The strawberry scene. There's no watermelon. The strawberry and something else, milk.
Yep.
Which, drinking milk out of a bowl with a bunch of other people seems like a really weird.
Yeah, when she was talking about the bowl, like, I'll bring you a bowl. I'm like, oh, a bowl of the strawberries. Just, no, just a big old tureen of the milk.
Big old thing of milk. Let's all.
I'd like to think about. Yeah.
Pretty great way to spread plague, huh?
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually just about to go there.
It depends on this particular plague, the Black Death. No, but things like cholera would be a terrible idea to share a tureen of
small pea plague. Yeah.
So that was kind of on my mind, because so in the scene immediately before that is the rootin' tootin', dance jester scene in the bar where Raval's tormenting Yuff, and Yuff manages to get himself out of that scene. But he steals the bracelet that Raval took off the plague-stricken body. and he goes straight to his wife and gives her that bracelet, and then then she pours a big old bowl of milk that every single person that's seen drinks from. And I was wondering, I was wondering if like if again, if you read this on like the surface level action of the movie, could you read that as they caught the plague in that scene, and that's why they all die in the castle?
I think
that doesn't
when
really
they
track
die,
with that doesn't, but that doesn't track with Yof and Mia not having the plague, not dying of the plague.
I think when they die of plague in the castle, I think that tips that off is when they get there. The wife has a Antonius Block's wife has a, what's the word, a bubo.
Bubo.
It's like she has a bubo on her face, and I was thinking, I was, oh, why didn't they get an actress who didn't have a gigantic blemish on her face? But considering the lengths they went to with the scar and the other things they've done about faces, I think that was not an accident, and I think that's meant to that's to say this is where they're getting the plague. But
or maybe they got it from Raval, because Joseph and Mary had left by the time.
Yes, because Revolt's third scene is he shows up dying of the plague.
I thought of that, but I don't think that's necessarily incorrect, except that they go to great lengths to not go and give him water. Like a lot of time is spent on they avoid contacting him, which doesn't necessarily mean they didn't get it from him. But I thought that's what that meant, was they didn't get it from him. They managed, but maybe we're being a little too literal about the plague in this. I don't know if.
If you want to talk about modernist readings, I think we are all intimately familiar with the communicability of a plague and the efforts one must take to feel safe about not getting it.
Yeah, or like maybe some people won't take any lengths to keep from getting the plague. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Right. I think if it had been as deadly as the Black Death, I think people would have been wearing their freaking masks and getting a vaccine. I think there would have been. You'd slightly hope so. Higher acceptance rate, but
you'd hope so. All right, sorry. So I'm counting down like the number of proposed remakes of this movie. We have the Star Wars remake.
That's a good one.
The Western remake. We have the extremely modern dress remake in the COVID era. And there's one the Quentin Tarantino remake.
The Quentin Tarantino remake. Yeah.
So it's at least 4. Is that 5?
The Swedish. Do you speak it?
What doth your wallet say?
Yeah.
It's the one that says Grim Reaper. Speaking of which, that was
does this look like Dead Witch Storage, my good man?
Does it said Dead Vicar Storage?
Forsooth, storing dead vicars is not my
storing dead vicars ain't my. Maybe that's getting kept because it's funny, but I feel like we're gonna get canceled or whatever. Mild surprise. How far back do you guys think the term Grim Reaper would go?
That anthropomorphic personification of death become popularized.
Yeah, it really seems
like it's right around the Black Death. So
yeah, I feel like
20.
Yeah, I feel like it could have been coined at any point, really.
The personification of death is really interesting. I actually went into it a little bit, and it goes way, way back.
We got that on tarot cards.
We got 10 How old minutes. Are they? Tarot cards actually date to the late 1800s at the earliest.
Really?
Yeah, it's a thing that people made up, like fake, around the same time as the Theosophists and stuff like that, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Grim Reaper, the term Grim Reaper dates back to 1847 is the earliest use of it. But there's a whole bunch of stuff about death that goes way back. And obviously each culture deals with it very differently. For instance, the Norse had this whole different character specifically for plague that would come and bring either a broom or a rake, depending on whether anybody was going to survive the plague. And it looked like the Grim Reaper, essentially. But I thought it was interesting that he chose the sort of traditional...
we haven't talked about the Smith and his wife. Right. But yeah, the Smith is his wife, and the scene where Smith catches up with his wife. It is, by the way, an hour into the movie.
Yes.
We get everyone assembled and walking through the woods, which it's like everything is a build up to that point where everyone is together walking through the woods on the way to, Tony Block's castle or whatever it is.
All right, Sopranos remake. Got it.
There's a witch. They end up at the castle. How am I not going to be reminded of Wizard of Oz? Come on.
But you have this comedy scene where the Smith catches up with his wife, who's run off with the leader of the comedy troupe.
Right.
They have this whole back and forth with each other, with the squire providing running commentary on how the wife is going to ingratiate herself back with her husband, and
incredible color commentary.
Yeah,
honestly, the whole death of Jonas Scott part is really remarkable. I feel like
yes, I was going to bring that up too.
I mean, that's the only person that death kills. Does he kill anybody? He actually kills Jonas Scott. Like,
I was not expecting that at all. I thought it would be
I wasn't
accidental death, and death was just there to reach his soul.
Yeah.
But death
he kills him.
A hand in it. Yeah.
It's a straight up Bugs Bunny routine, is what it is.
It really is. It really is. Which is what I was saying. There's a lot of silliness through the first hour and 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden the witch burning scene. I was like, ugh, this is upsetting. Like, I don't know if I like this part, but I mean, enjoy it. I liked it. It was good. Does Death do that in any other incarnation of Death? Does he actually bring about the death of the person? I don't remember seeing that in anything. I mean, you guys know Terry Pratchett way better than me. In fact, I've never read any of the Terry Pratchett's that have death. So the only one I
should do for your show one day, because Mort is a great book. And a lot of that gets into this, so I don't want to spoil any of it, but there's a code there for death. So
yes, the Terry Pratchett death is a bystander.
I read the Piers Anthony. I read the Piers Anthony ones about death, where he gives the power to be death to like a new person, and that's the whole book.
Yeah. Oh boy, do you want to do one of those with the pod sometime? I'm sure there's a lot.
I thought those were actually pretty cool. I read that one, and I read the one about fate, I think it was.
Yeah, I think I read almost all of them. I think he's gone back and done a couple more, but yeah, I read like the main sequence of like 7 or so. And I remember liking them at the time, but I probably have to stress at the time.
No, I thought it was, I mean, I wasn't like a little kid. I was in my 20s when I read them. I enjoyed them.
Really? I read those in like junior high.
Yeah, no, you totally could. They would be good for that age. I used to let what was available on books on tape at the library determine what I read. So just like walk around, I was like, oh, all right, I'll read this. I don't know why I picked that. I have no idea how I ended up reading that. But I did want to mention how Swedish babies go Porky Pig all the time. Apparently, that's very.
What does that mean? Oh, you already. Yes.
You know what Porky Pig is.
Thank you for making me remember. Yes, thank you for making me remember the baby's naked ass, Dave.
Honestly, I have to say, Joe, when I think of Porky Pig, the phrase "Porky Pigging it," I think about that time we went to the beach.
God damn it, Dave!
Now that should be a ringtone.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure to remember. I wanted to talk about my favorite shot in the film, which is the big lunch scene where they're enjoying their communal strawberries and milk, and maybe I'll give you the plague. And Block is holding forth about how great it is and how wonderful life is, and the coldest moment is in Heart Forever. Is example of the goodness of sweet, sweet life. And like off on the left on a pole is like the skull mask from the earlier performance, just hanging out, reminding everybody, "Hey, Death's here. What up?"
A little memento mori while you're eating your strawberries and milk. Yeah.
Did you think that Block and Yost's wife were flirting before that?
There seemed to be like a weird boundary crossing between the women and the men all through the movie. It seemed to me like they have this guy that like sleeps in their trailer with them, and there seemed to be a weird kind of a boundary crossing there. And then
I think that's called being poor.
Yeah, but didn't it seem like there was a little bit of almost like a romantic tension there? And then obviously he runs off with another guy's wife, and then she comes back and is like perfectly willing to just negotiate with these other. I don't know. Maybe that's just a Swedish thing. Like maybe there's definitely a little bit of bohemian.
Well, the unnamed girl is saved from the thief, and then he just sort of declares that she shall be his servant.
Right.
He may have a wife, but he doesn't know. It's been 10 years since he saw her. She's probably dead.
And we never learn whether that's the case for the squire.
Correct.
Well, I had 2 other subjects I wanted to talk about. What do you guys know about the Danse Macabre as like a concept in world civilization? Like all I know is the Stephen King book. I read it, and I really don't have a whole lot of memories about where that comes from.
Yeah, I know it's like an artistic motif that comes out of the Black Plague, but like that's just kind of cultural osmosis. I don't know.
It is specifically rooted in the Black Death, huh?
That's what I think. I mean, again, that's on the top of my dome. I could be wrong, but
now that you mention it, that it's probably something from the Decameron. But I thought maybe you guys would know a little something about that. You guys are both, I would say, better medieval scholars than myself.
Well, thank you for thinking too highly of us.
Yeah, I really don't know.
Speaking of which, the history is a little garbled up in this film. There are no witch burnings at this point in history in the 1300s. There are no, I think flagellants didn't exist in this part of the world. We were just talking about it, but the Crusades are kind of anachronistic for the time of the Black Death. At least the Crusades is understood, as we talk about them, the first, second, that's all 300 years before. there were crusades into Eastern Europe at this time, and I don't know if it's explicitly he talks about going to the Holy Land in the movie. Do you remember whether that's mentioned?
Oof.
Or is he maybe in
his squire does talk about going to the Holy Land and dealing with fleas and lice and various other things. And
I sort of thought they actually explicitly called it out as being one of the crusades to the Holy Land, which would be anachronistic, which would not be correct for this time period. But there were crusades into places like Lithuania and Poland and Eastern Germany and things like that, which were essentially still pagan countries at that time.
Another thing about the witch burning scene that kind of struck me was, who knows whether it is an intentional piece of staging or not, whether that's historically accurate, but just the witch, like in her second lucid scene, talking about like constantly being like watched over by the devil, and like her close cropped hair kind of put me in mind of Joan of Arc for some reason.
Who
herself did wind up
because herself did kind of wind up burned. She's a little bit of a Christ figure, right? Isn't she kind of up on a cross before she gets burned? And so, anyway, she's up there suffering for a long time. And there's a like I said before, there's a Mary and Jesus image, and there's a woman who's up there burning, and a little bit of there's always a little bit of a Jesus thing with witch burnings, right? Because it's a sacrifice and a public execution like that. But I don't know.
But it's also paganistic too in a lot of ways.
It is.
There's a lot to read into
but
this
it's
movie.
A burning of the pagan, right? It's a destruction of the pagan. Sacrificing people like that is pagan, kind of a Wicker Man kind of thing.
There's so much happening in this movie. I think you can
there is
a dozen different ways.
There really is. It's really interesting, but I noticed there's only one distiller of akvavit in the entire United Kingdom, according to what I read. That may not be true, but it's called Psychopomp.
Wow.
And I thought that was really interesting because death obviously is the great psychopomp. And was it a reference to this movie, or where is that coming from? I thought that was
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I'd really like to talk to the people that created Psychopomp Micro Distillery, but
I don't think we've actually talked about how the movie ends, have we?
No.
Good point.
Not explicitly, no. Go for it.
So we know that the giant troop was going through the forest. At a certain point, Death comes out and plays his last game against Tony Block, and Tony loses. But while that happens,
Yoff sees them doing this.
And realizes, he decides that three's a crowd, and they need to get the heck out of there while Death is distracted. So that, like metaphorically speaking, the gaze of Death will pass over them. Everyone else in the group will die, but they'll get away. And that's actually what ends up happening. The group travels on to Block's castle / house. I don't know that we ever see the outside of it.
And I think that's important for the existentialist nature of the film. The existentialist reading. I think it's stronger than a reading. I think that's explicitly what he's doing here. But Block talks about how he's going to die, and he wants to find this like one meaningful thing that he's going to do with his life. And essentially, he delays death enough, fools death by knocking over the pieces to allow this one family to escape the plague. And it's the one thing he does in his life that's meaningful, despite the fact that life is meaningless. And I think that's a very existentialist statement. I think the ending is very important to the message of the film, as I see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's good that you brought that up.
And it leads directly into my biggest surprise, if we're ready for that.
I think we're ready.
Are we ready? Okay, let's do it. Biggest surprise. And let's start with Chris, since Chris has teased us so much with his biggest surprise. Hopefully it's not going to be that he's Porky Pigging it through the whole podcast.
Absolutely not.
Okay, good.
That would be all of our greatest surprise.
So the last shot of the movie is basically all of the dead people being led by Death on a hillside.
Right.
Dancing under this voluminous thundercloud. My biggest surprise is that was not planned.
Right.
That was something that the directors saw the cloud and just said, we need to film this. I have a great idea. Most of the actors had already gone home. So the people in that scene are
not the main actors from
various key grips, lighting technicians, and 2 tourists.
That's very cool.
So that is a beautiful, lasting shot, the final shot of the movie, as it turns out.
Uh-huh.
And it was just made up on the spot.
Serendipity.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said for the era when filmmaking was cheaper. I mean, it wasn't cheap. It wasn't a cheap endeavor, but it was cheaper than today. If you're making Ant-Man 9, you cannot be inspired and put together a shot to throw into the movie Ant-Man 9. Everything costs $100 million and has to be done in computers. They're not even exterior shots.
And realistically, in Ant-Man 9, whenever it comes out, the fight scenes have been pre-visualized 2 years prior. So as a director, you're only directing certain portions of the movie.
Right. I mean, they've been storyboarded ad nauseum, I'm sure. So anyway.
You're saying that's why you haven't seen the Eighth Seal. They just can't get the suits to sign off on that huge of a budget.
That's right. That's a pretty good surprise. I like that because one of the most famous shots from the film is just an inspired thing that couldn't happen in modern cinema, I don't think. So I guess mine is kind of minor. It's very important to the way the film is put together. But I think I actually watched this movie when I was about 8. I think my dad showed it to me because he was really into trying to show me the great films of history. So I think we did watch it because I do remember watching the death scenes, but it's a very vague memory. Anyway, but what I thought of it as being there's this whole movie and then a climactic chess game between the Knight and the Grim Reaper. And I didn't think it was like you start a couple moves and then you get to go walk around and do a bunch of stuff in between moves. And I was thinking, I guess maybe it would ruin it because I didn't really understand that it's one day. That makes a lot more sense. It seemed to me like this movie kind of rambled through several days or weeks. I didn't really put together that it was one day.
It is a very unhurried pace. Yes.
It's a very unhurried pace to the film. There's a lot of people being involved. A lot of things happen, but it makes sense. I mean, the witch gets burned. They meet the witch is on trial and about to be burned, and it would make sense that she gets burned that same day. I definitely think you're right about being one day, but it's not how I perceived it during the first watch. I guess what I'm saying is my biggest surprise is the leisurely pace of the game against death.
For all that it's like probably the most iconic image to come out of this movie, it's a relatively small part overall.
So we talked about Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, but what I realize is there's one scene where they're sitting together to play chess at the table, and I realized that's the shot from Princess Bride when they sit down to play the game against each other. The death, never go against the Sicilian when death is on the line.
Death is on the line. Yeah,
clearly it's framed and shot just like the chess game. But anyway,
check out the big brain on Rob Reiner.
I didn't catch that. I like that.
It's cool. There's a whole lot of nods to this film in various movies. But that's one that I saw right there. So
that's a good segue to me. Yeah, because this is a super influential movie. Casts a long shadow over a lot of things. There's a lot to dig into, and I've had a great time here digging into it with you guys. But my biggest surprise was that when I was actually sitting watching the movie directly, it kind of didn't do a lot for me.
Yep.
Like the actual act of watching the movie, and I think that it is precisely because this movie is so influential and looms so large that it's so influential that it's become cliched. It has ascended to that point where I don't think it's possible to watch this movie without already having seen a lot of it.
Imagine yourself as a moviegoer in 1958 sitting down
exactly
to watch this film. Yeah. It's hard to do that. It's very
I don't think about that very thing a few different times. I think we call it the time traveler problem, where you can't go back and read the time traveler and because you've seen all those ideas and other things.
My daughter asked me the other day, she said, I'm trying to catch up on some classic films and I want to watch Citizen Kane and Casablanca. And so I was like, Casablanca is immediately going to strike you. You're going to enjoy the movie and you're going to like it as a movie right away because the dialogue's great. It's a funny movie. It pulls on the emotions. It's like the actual script is what's great about that movie. Citizen Kane, I know from learning about movies, is an amazing cinematic accomplishment, but it's really hard to know how much it broke the rules for something from, what is it, 1942?
Yeah, something like that. That's really funny, actually, because I actually had the opposite response to those movies. When I watched Casablanca, I was like, I've been marinating in this soup my whole life. I can't come to this movie with unblemished eyes. But Citizen Kane, all I knew about it was the spoiler that everyone knows. So there was so much of that movie that I didn't know and hadn't seen, and I was like shocked by how funny it was as well. Like, I loved Citizen Kane when I watched it.
Maybe I need to go back and watch it again. The story isn't as compelling to me.
I think a lot of what Wells gets credit for is his ability to create shots that had never existed in cinema before.
Which is very difficult. It's a time traveler problem. A shot that had never been done before in 1940 has been done a million times in my life, and I've seen it. I, took it in
and
the day I was
think
born.
Bergman probably suffers from that a bit as well. Too, so.
Exactly. Because I was watching a video about the movie, and someone was talking about each shot being like a painting. And I went back and looked at it, and I was like, it really is. It really is. There's a lot of thought going in each one of these shots. They're framed in a way that somebody's putting thought into things, expecting them to be seen over and over again, and to be kind of like appreciating a painting, from the 1800s or the 1700s or something. You have to put yourself in the mind of what people would have seen at the time and try to, if you think about what a painting in the Renaissance would have done to somebody's mind with what they'd seen in real life, it would blow your mind. And something like Citizen Kane or Seven Seals is the same thing. You look at what you would have seen before that, and you try to picture that person's mind. It's a trick of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. That's difficult to pull off intuitively. It's like you said. I had the same reaction, Joe. I watched the movie, and it wasn't doing that much for me. I was like,
yeah, it's just been so thoroughly digested and homaged and parodied that it's really, really hard to just like scrape off all those layers of the pearl and get back to that original.
When I saw the title of this film in Swedish, I actually went on Google Translate to play how it would be pronounced in Swedish. Like, it looks like Det sjunde inseglet, but the way they say it on Google Translate is like Det hunde inseglet. And I was like, okay, apparently Swedish is just impossible to pronounce. It's just one of those.
The seventh dog. I also want to bring up briefly that I am pretty sure that I have seen this movie before. I'm pretty sure I saw it during college, like in film class, but I have no memory of it. What I do remember, though, is the film the film my professor played after The Seventh Seal, Der Duva, which is a somewhat notorious parody of this movie in particular and Bergman in general. And in that movie, like, they play like badminton against death.
So I think we've come to the point on the podcast where we decide whether or not we're going to toast this classic. Who's feeling a little iffy? Is anybody iffy? I think that person should go first. Yeah,
I think it's no drama this time. I think it's unanimous.
I'll go first then, because I think I was where Joe was with your biggest surprise. I watched this and I was like, what's the big deal? I enjoyed the shots at the beginning with the beach. I thought they were great. I could see that. I liked the idea of death, the way he acted and things. I enjoyed a lot of the characters, but I was like, is this really that? What's the big deal? It turned around for me at the witch burning scene. Like I said, I felt like I suddenly became much more emotionally invested there. Like, that hit me for some reason. And then the end, I just thought was more serious and important. And, when it came out of it, my overall thought was, I was like, maybe I'm going to go into the podcast and sort of be devil's advocate and say, like, is this one any good? But when we started talking about it, pulling apart all the different layers to what's going on in the film, and to me, that's right away where you're starting to get into classic territory. If you can have a fun and interesting and smart conversation about something, I feel like you kind of have to toast, and that's where I'm ending up. So I'm raising my glass to this one.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Dave. Yeah, like, I have no illusions whatsoever that my issues with like getting into this movie and enjoying it as a piece of filmmaking are absolutely on me and not on any of the cast or crew. Because like there's a whole lot in this movie. There's a whole lot to tease out. We had a really great discussion about it.
Yeah,
and I appreciate and respect this movie. And it's really just my it's really just my fault that this movie is so good that it's just been so thoroughly absorbed into our cultural ether that I can't appreciate it firsthand anymore. That is, I'm too familiar.
It's like a lack of imagination on my part to not be able to appreciate how great it must have been in 1958. It's kind of how I feel.
To The Seventh Seal for me, certainly. It's a classic.
That's two. So you're outvoted, Chris, if you want to weigh in against this classic of Swedish film, but you can do so if you so choose.
Well, this movie comes in with some handicaps against it. It's got 65 years out of its era. It's in black and white. It's in a foreign language.
Right.
And despite all that, I found it pretty gripping from start to finish. There were some parts in the middle where I found it a little bit harder to push through for whatever reason, but it's a stellar cast. Someone can take a role that's not particularly large and make meat out of it and just be a standout, memorable performance. And as you said, we've been sitting here talking about it for 2.5 hours or whatever it is in real time, not in compressed actual podcast time.
It's like we said about the Big Lebowski. I think what you just said reminded me of that. It's like when you have a character that's on screen, they're not wasting your time. Like everybody does something with even the smallest parts that they have that's interesting. It's like that. It's like the villain Reval is like the Jesus. You know, I mean, it's like, do not waste my time. If you're going to be on the screen, do something cool, be memorable. And I feel like that was sort of the watchword for this one too.
Yeah, I felt like there were very few time wasters. I felt maybe there were a couple of them. The Smith and his wife, maybe
A little goofy, right? They're a little goofy.
Totally a little different from the rest of
Yeah.
but no, I gotta give it to this movie. It's worth checking out. Only if only to say you've seen it, and it's very pretty. It's a gorgeous movie.
Yeah. Can I ask, Chris? Is this the first time you'd seen this movie?
It's funny. I was just thinking this is, I think, the first time I've been on the podcast. I've been the only one who hasn't seen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Usually, it's something either I suggest or multiple people are coming in without having seen it. But
I'm counting myself as not having seen it. I think I saw it when I was a little tiny kid, and I think I fell asleep 5 minutes into the movie, maybe even. I mean, I don't count that. So
yeah, like I said, I must have seen this before, but like clearly just in like a fugue state.
Yeah.
No, so this was totally fresh to me. I'd never seen a Bergman movie before, so I was pretty excited to actually sit down and watch it. And I'm glad we did. Thank you for the suggestion. That was
nice.
Yeah, this was a fun one. I thought we had a good discussion here. I thought this was I'm glad I can check this off my list. This was a good movie to watch. I guess for Toasting the Classics, I'm ready to sign off. And I've enjoyed and by the way, I'm toasting akvavit.
Oh, yeah, the drink itself. All right.
The drink itself, exactly. So
just drinking without ice the next time. You get definitely more of that floral bouquet.
I don't know if I want more of the floral bouquet. We'll see, but we'll see. Anyway, for Toasting the Classics, this is Dave McArthur signing off.
I've been Chris Gragg.
I'm still Joe.
All right, peace out, everybody.
It is finished.
That's it for episode 88 of Toasting the Classics. I hope you had half as much fun listening as we did recording that one. For those playing along at home, stay tuned to find out what we'll be drinking as we discuss the surfing documentary Endless Summer. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and teach us some swear words in Swedish. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @reactivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics. I wish the phrase porky pigging it did not bring you to mind, but it does.
You just blew my mind there a little bit, Dave.